Welcome to the Marshall Pruett podcast. In our Week in Sports Cars episode, Graham Goodwin down in Australia at the Bathurst 12-hour. It's our one-year anniversary show, my friend.
Amazing. Happy anniversary, Marshall. Dear me, I've not bought you anything at all other than just my obvious good wishes and a massive, I'm sure, bag full of jealousy for the fact that I'm here and you're not. But it is going to be an amazing weekend here at Mount Panorama.
Well, the box of chocolates and fluffy robe I bought you might have, I think I might have gone in the wrong direction here. We're coming off of, a memorable Rolex 24 at Daytona IMSA season opener. Lots to discuss there, all courtesy of our dear listeners, our glorious little listener-driven Q&A show, The Week in Sports Cars. We did just launch today, without you, unfortunately, but next week we'll get that fixed. Our new Inside the Sports Car Paddock weekly show, which is meant to be the complement to this. It's purely interviews with our friends in the paddock talking about either a race that just happened, something of interest, and so we've launched this with Jeff Brown, race engineer for the Core Auto Sport Nissan On-Road DPI effort, Brandon Fry, technical director for the Rolex 24 winning BMW Team RLL effort in GTLM, and also our man Dinger, AJ Allmendinger, who both drove in GTD for the Meyer-Shank Acura team and spent the rest of his time, or plenty of his extra time, I should say, on the NBC Sports broadcast. So hopefully get a chance to check that out. We'll be doing that weekly. It's a pretty simple format. I'll try and speak with at least one person, maybe two. Graham will do his best to grab a couple of folks from his end. We'll put those together, and that'll go right alongside our Week in Sports Cars Q&A show. Interviews, Q&A. I hope, Graham, we're kind of giving folks everything that makes sense to us on this one-year anniversary.
We are, and I'm not going to say who I've got lined up for the next week's show, which will be really a look at this Bathurst 12 Hours, the Intercontinental GT Challenge. This now forms a part of, but there's some big names and some people I'm very happy they're going to spend a little bit of extended time with me. As you can hear in the background, there's a bit of a hooter, and I think that is to clear the track here at Mount Panorama, because what we're about to see is something that's never happened here before, which is under police escort on each of the marks of GT3 car that are here for the Bathurst 12 Hours. That makes 10 cars are going to go under escort on the public road into Bathurst Town Centre for a bit of a showdown there with the fans and with the media, of course, and that's going to look pretty fantastic. The cars do look amazing. We've got some fantastic new liveries for the start of the new IGTC, new livery for Bentley, new livery for the Elbamba Motorsport cars, which just look amazing. It's all shaping up, MP, to be a fabulous start to the Intercontinental GT Challenge.
One of the things, Graham, you mentioned something that had never been seen before at Bathurst. I thought you were going to say sober fans, but I love the idea of the little parade there. You know, this pretty cool thing that we continue to build upon on this one-year anniversary topic for TWISC is the folks who have come on board and said, you know, we want to get behind this and support it. We really appreciate the really passionate fans and listeners that you have. So our great friends at Cooper Tires, who've been with us for all of 2018 and are back as well for the entirety of 2019, and also our new old friends. They're very old friends for me, but new to the podcast, that being the Justice Brothers, who are on board as well. We have two truly fine companies that have put their name atop the masthead of what we are doing here, Graham, on the Week in Sports Cars, our Marshall Pruett podcasts, everything that we do. So thank you to them for not only finding value in what we do, but for allowing us to make everything free, everything that is about y'all. And with that said, let's get into our y'all episode of the Week in Sports Cars following the Rolex 24 leading into the Bathurst 12 of the topics that our dear ginger friend from Daily Sports Car, Ryan Kish, has assembled on IMSA, what we kind of call WEC ASLAM ACO, that is WEC, Asian Le Mans Series NACO, General, and Fun and Off Topic. Which one of those four should we start with?
I think we should go for the IMSA. I think it was a huge weekend, of course, weekend passed, and I think as some of the listeners know, I didn't actually see the end of the race. I was actually busy getting my way down here in good order, so left the track just as the race was going back to green. So lots to talk about, I know, in terms of, some epic racing in the early part of the Rolex 24, and then, perhaps something a little bit less epic towards the end of it, but a myriad of questions there. And I'm going to start serving them up to you, my friend.
Well, you were there too, so I'll be serving them back. Normally, you heave the American sports car stuff my way. I send the others yours, but since we were both there together and took part in what was one of our highlights, I have to believe, the 100-plus brave souls who came out in fairly bitter cold on Friday for the first Week in Sports Cars live episode of 2019, hosted by Mazda, put on by Mazda, where we gave away 75 T-shirts that they made, custom Week in Sports Car branded tees. That was a blast. I've got the audio, going to try and get the video going, and so we'll have that up here shortly. But since we were both there, we get to play with IMSA for sure.
Well, that works for me, but we're going to kick off with one for you, and it's from Tom Bacon on Twitter. And Tom asks, should the Rolex 24 introduce a Le Mans-style safety car system in light of the multi-car incidents on the start-finish straight?
I read this one when it came in, Graham, and maybe you can help me, but I'm trying to think of how that might help in this specific incident that's being referenced, because we were red. Then we went to yellow, cars circulated a little bit. Then we went to green, and on that green, coming to green on the start-finish straight, there was a ladder mid-pack crash between two GTD cars. So I don't know how the light system would help in that.
I wonder if Tom is actually mistyping, if you like, and actually what he means is a more full-course yellow type operations. In other words, that the cars are operating, not in close formation, but with the gaps that would almost be there, but a much reduced speed and with no safety car. I suspect that's probably what he means. That is the way in which the Le Mans system, the WEC system, is defined more often from IMSA's broadly safety car based system, which of course means the cars are all bunched up, and particularly in tricky conditions, therefore closer to each other if things go badly wrong. I suspect that's what Tom means.
And if that is what's meant here, Tom, then I think it would be fantastic to consider creating more distance, more separation between cars on a restart. Granted, those who are further back probably might not support such an idea, but knowing what we witnessed, though, Tom, in the fact that there was so much crazy rain and spray, all things that we knew, there was no mystery about what was going to happen, and we'll get into this a little bit more. There are plenty of questions about red flag treatment, when and where and why, but there was no mystery that crashes and spins were going to happen when we went back to green after that first red, because the track conditions had not improved enough to prevent any of that. And even if, say, the track's surface had gotten back to a place where it was just vastly improved, there was still going to be enough spray hanging in the air, coming out of diffusers and otherwise, that we were going to have visibility problems. So these things played out exactly as we expected. The crashes that happened between the Ebby Motors Lamborghini and the Pfaff Motorsports Porsche, it could have been anybody, but we knew it was going to be someone. I like the idea, Tom, of the system maybe, hopefully creating more distance and separation, possibly improving visibility a little bit in this rain scenario that specifically took place. I don't know if it would be enough separation to truly eradicate the visibility issues, but improving the percentage possibility, I would say, if that is something that could have been done, yeah, give us better odds. Yeah, I'll throw this in quickly as well, and maybe this is already a well-known fact. I can't say, but I did learn just a little while ago, Graham, that the Ebby Motors Lamborghini destroyed, completely totaled, and that, at least according to the team owner, they are not intending on returning anytime soon. So it's one thing to have a badly damaged race car that needs repair. It's another thing to lose a highly expensive Lamborghini Huracan GT3 in a crash that I would say never should have happened, because the race should have never returned to green at that point in time.
I tend to agree with you. So, unsurprisingly, there's a number of questions on that kind of front added in. Right Turn Lover, our good friend from Switzerland, from Twitter, asked should they add code 60 as an arsenal to of a way to neutralise a race. He believes, and I tend to agree with him, there are incidents which under code 60 would have been cleared in 60 seconds. This is, though, part of the way in which Daytona is different, isn't it? You know, there is that we heard it from very early on the race with teams who'd suffered unfortunate delay, that they were looking for those cautions to help them to get back the laps on wave by. It is something that defines that race. It does make it very different to any of the other 24-hour races that we cover around the world. So on one front, I do agree with you that certainly there are instances where we were there behind a safety car for several minutes, which could have been done perfectly adequately in seconds had there been a kind of code 60 thing in place. But equally, there is an argument here that says it is unique, it is different, and that is what makes it special. Yes, you have to buy into a very different strategic feel to the Rolex 24 Hours as compared to the Nürburgring or to Spa or to Le Mans. But, you know, different is good, and I firmly believe that. It did take me some years to get my head around that, but now I have. I can sort of embrace it for what it is, as being fundamentally different from the others. Not better, not worse, just different.
Let's go to the second question here from Jonathan Schultz. It says, do you think the BMW M6 GT3 and the M8 GTE would be more successful overall if they happen to be based instead on the more compact BMW M4 model? It's an interesting one, Graham, knowing that in the first instance, being a GT3 car, in theory, GT3 was created to allow anything to be competitive. Yep. So I don't know if that model would apply here, Jonathan. And for the M8 side, I mean, they've
just won the Rolex. They've just got the Rolex. It didn't do that bad. And, you know, the M6, remember, winner at the Spa 24 Hours. That team is here this weekend with Volgan Horse Racing. And, by the way, lest we forget, and I want to mention this one, BMW Team Schnitzer with their first race since the untimely and terrible news of the death of Charlie Lamb. God bless his soul and rest in peace. What a fabulous man he was. But no, I don't see the problem. We have had, of course, the predecessor for the M4, the M3, was the front line, effectively what is now a GTE car. Not that long ago, at the start of the decade. Have to say, we have an M4 GT4 car here at Bathurst, and it's a neat and tidy thing, but it's pretty uninspiring. I'll be honest with you, as a race car, it looks a little bit Uber.
Well, I mean, at the same time, they've chosen to use that as their GT4 solution. So, I believe the 235 M4, something along those lines. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But that smaller size model, I mean, the way at least my viewpoint, the way that BMW has chosen models and used them, you know, again, something a little smaller in the M4, sure. Smaller never hurts when you're talking about going up against supercars. But they don't have a dedicated supercar model, so to me, if none of them fit that waist knee-high Ford GT type sizing and such, then, you know, whether it's an M4 or an M8, you're still dealing with a vehicle that's going to be bigger than the rest. So, I think we're talking granular differences here compared to, boy, if you move down to the M4, it would be a transformative decision. So just a guess, though. Again, as always, I'm probably wrong.
I'll explain, by the way, what you're hearing in the background.
Well,
you inevitably can.
Good to know Taco Bells are still up and running in Australia.
Well, we're about to be treated to the Group S Classic Sports Car Racing qualifying session. This is everything from, you know, MGBs, Austin Healey Sprites at one end, up to the car you just heard there, which was a De Tomaso Pantera, Corvettes, 911 Porsches, you name it, some fabulous machines, and they'll be around the mountain in just a few minutes. You'll hear them blasting by as we consider the weekend sports cars. And nice of a soundtrack to life, isn't it, really? Is it something a little bit different from one of our USCR Redditors, MJ D'Amore, asks, Marshall, do you think IMSA made the right call banning diesel engines in the 2017 DPI regs? If they hadn't, do you think Mazda would have stayed with their GX-P2 engine?
I do not think that they would have stayed with that. Knowing many of the difficulties that they faced, they were thermal limited, is the only way I can phrase it. In order to make more power, they would need to turn up the overall power making capabilities, which comes through burning more diesel, running hotter. Hotter equals more power. And they were just at the limits of their ability to cool the motor, had gone to the biggest darn radiators that they could just to try to keep the thing from melting down. And so knowing that while they were certainly far more competitive by the end of the diesel prototype effort, they just found that at least for their architecture, which was painted into a somewhat restricted, if not entirely restricted LMP2 format, right, compared to the diesel LMP1 cars, where they made them as they chose. There are obviously some dimensions that they had to stay within, but cooling was something that the Peugeot team in Audi could write on their own and make work sufficiently. Having to make that work within the framework of an existing car, that seemed to be the issue that they fell into. So I don't think that there was much to be gained, if anything to be gained, really, by continuing the program. And nor do I think that they were ever going to make the power necessary to trouble the other LMP2 cars. So timing was right for it. I don't know about a ban, though. That's the thing that I'm always a little worried about, Graham. Just because one manufacturer wasn't able to get what they wanted out of something, not necessarily a fan of saying, well, then we're going to rid that possibility from the rule book altogether. So wasn't something Mazda was going to turn into a winner, but... that's awesome. Look, we've got some real racing sounds in the background. I'm not gonna
we do. We do.
And,
very much so.
So
I'm going to have to try not to be distracted by the fabulous cars blasting by me under the Ilikimoli Bridge here on the start-finish straight. Let's move on. Let's go for our good friend Bonnie Lass 47. And Bonnie Lass 47, your fabulous gesture of handing over the prize you got for Question of the Week before Christmas. That will be done later today. I'm going to be meeting our good friend Floodman from the Reddit group here on the mountain. Good. And he'll be getting the AMG GT3 model that you so kindly donated to him for his efforts. But Bonnie Lass asks, Jeff Brown posted random observations on the Rolex Daytona 24 on Instagram, which included this. Still wish DPI and LMP2 were one class, though. Can you ask why he still feels that way?
I would say this is a guy who nearly engineered his team to an IMSA prototype championship last year using an LMP2 car. And so having been at the forefront of that spec car's capabilities, I think he's just fond of it. I think it's just simply a case of being fond of what they were able to do, and also knowing that we have two cars, hopefully, that are in full-time for the season. I think Jeff also, as a historian, someone who's been a part of the sports car racing landscape for decades, is like many of us. He just wants to see health. And so I think there's probably also a concern that if LMP2 continues to be in a class of its own, and we only have two full-time entrants, we're always at risk for things toppling over if one steps away. I'll refrain from getting into it, but I had a very interesting and long conversation today with one of the two full-time team owners, Brent O'Neill, the Performance Tech Motorsports team owner. And he voiced some very serious concerns about coming out of Daytona and something that he said he will need to have improve. And he also spoke a bit for his friend, Bobby Ergel, co-owner of the Pierre-1 Matheson LMP2 team, the other full-time entrant, on a significant loss of value they both experienced at the Rolex 24. This is just our every minute and a half or so 2-minute pause of awesome racing sounds.
They can listen in, and they're more than welcome to do so. Hey, it's worth mentioning, by the way, I had conversations with a number of people involved in LMP2 land, some of which were racing at the Rolex 24, some of which weren't. I know there's been some toing and froing about what has and hasn't been said and done in terms of IMSA and LMP2. Let's just make this clear. Both you and we have run stories about the LMP2 teams looking to see whether or not there will be an improvement in the numbers for IMSA, or whether or not we might see some of those teams looking further afield. Make no mistake, that's the business model. That's what they most certainly have done. Implying that they haven't done that, to at least look further afield, is false. That is not true, because I can tell you right now that both the full season teams most certainly have been in contact with parties in Europe to see whether or not that might be a better option, and there's still a way to go for that. I sincerely hope they don't do that, and there's two reasons for that. One is we've got plenty enough LMP2 teams in Europe, and two is I'd actually like the IMSA LMP2 class to be successful. So it's not a matter of who's in charge or whatever. It's actually a matter of common sense and spreading that love. They're two quality teams with really good setups there, and I hope they can sustain that business model, and I hope more will be coming. We know there are going to be some race-by-race entries, amongst others, from the Inter-Europol team for at least a couple of races later this season. There's a very noisy Corvette Stingray comes blasting by, but let's hope that can be sustained, and let's hope that maybe some new blood might show for Sebring or thereafter.
Where shall we go among our IMSA questions, my friend? Let's see. Why don't I take one here from Travis Bender, who asks, do we know what was said when Fernando hopped out of the Cadillac under red flag and went up to talk to the safety car driver straight away? He mentioned that in the post-race press conference. Apparently the driver, who also had, I guess, either an observer alongside in the other seat, the safety car driver was nowhere to be found when Fernando ducked his head in there. We assume the safety car driver was changing their shorts, because while leading and directly behind that safety car, Fernando said coming out of the bus stop that Audi R8 didn't just get sideways, but was completely sideways, pointed at the wall. And was asking if the person was okay and whatnot. And again, we have some more questions about red flag and timing and such. There was an inference made that after the pace car driver nearly wrecked, massively wrecked, the final red was then thrown. So Travis, he was just trying to check if there was a code brown that took place.
Yeah. Fair point. I mean, maybe they need to get on the phone and have a quick chat with Yannick Dalmas, who famously, of course, has explored at Le Mans and elsewhere the outer limits of handling of Audi pace cars in wet conditions, but that doesn't sound pleasant at all. But let's crack on with the next one, which is at Flowless Racing from Twitter. What do you think about the red flag procedures used by IMSA at the Rolex 24? I'm going to step away from this because I'll be blunt, I wasn't there when that happened, other than the first occasion, and I didn't see what happened thereafter. I was getting a running commentary via Stephen Kilby in the Daytona press room, but you were there, MP. What did you think?
Okay, we just made a little production note here where I asked Graham to try and mute his microphone when he's not speaking, so that way hopefully we don't have cars completely drowning things out, but we'll see if that works. There are three things really that come to mind here just as points to trigger off of. First of all, you have the timing of when to call the reds. There was the first one that was called, then obviously many hours later there was the second and final red to be called. There was the decision between those reds for a decent amount of time to keep cars on track circulating under yellow. So we're not talking about green, just the, hey, go out on track, and we're not competing, just keep circulating. The value of having those cars on track, doing that, simply to try and help improve track conditions. even at limited speeds, 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, something along those lines. We have splitters, diffusers, wings, tires, all kinds of things trying to evacuate water from the racing surface. Also, while they were doing that under yellow, you had the, whether it was a jet dryer, sweepers, you name it, a lot of track vehicles on there trying to improve. So there was the, all right, we're not racing, and hey, boy, it seems like we're just going around and around for a long time under yellow. Why? Well, there's a great reason for it. Nothing negative to say at all. 100% thumbs up to IMSA and the Daytona circuit for trying to use as many vehicles as possible to improve the track. Had they just stayed off, it would have been far worse. The third point I'll mention is something that I've heard of from a number of people. I can't say it's 100% accurate, but I'm confident that it is. That, let's just say that there were a lot of people in race control helping to make decisions. Beyond maybe the folks and the names that we would normally associate with making an individual call, without any other input, any other, I don't know what you want to call it, advisement, pressure, anything. From what I understand, there's a lot of folks in there. Senior members, stewards, race advisors, driver, all kinds of things. The normal group we kind of know of, plus maybe some others weighing in, that I believe influenced the timing of when things either went red, went to yellow, went back to green, continued green for far longer than I think anyone thought was warranted. So there's those three areas I would say really stand out to me as items to consider. I know that if we just look at the strict timeline, we're talking about the red flag, how that was managed. We went red, I'm just scrolling back here to try and get the exact time in front of me, went red at 7:21 a.m. We had the call that we were going back to yellow, so fire up and get rolling, at 8:59, a little over an hour and a half later. And then went green at 9:07. At 9:07, we had that aforementioned big pileup on I shouldn't say big, the two-car pileup on the front straight, but it was a very messy pileup, destroyed one car. Yellow flag came out immediately. Yellow came out at 9:08. Cars continued to circulate. We had a lot of folks pitting and whatnot, and we then basically did a lot of time there. And if we're looking at green, I believe we went green at 10:48. And so, if we're just, and I might be off, I might have missed the return to green in here somewhere, but spent a decent amount of time behind the pace car. Again, not a bad thing at all, using those cars to try and help improve the track situation. Whether we should have gone green at 9:07, that's the first part where I'm concerned about decision making. And this is not something mentioned in hindsight at all. Just to be clear, this isn't trying to do the Monday morning quarterback and say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. The minute that I heard that everybody fire up, we're going back racing, I have since learned, many, many others on pit lane, either in the cars or on the timing stand, said, what? And it was, to me, absolutely inevitable that the moment we went back to green, there was going to be a crash, if not on the first lap, almost immediately, and then lots of spins, lots of other crashes, lots of other issues. It wasn't even a question of whether it would happen or not. And this isn't because I have exceptional intelligence, not at all. I'm a racer. My entire adult life has been involved as a racer. The team side as a driver for a year and a half or two, just many things. You do this long enough, you are involved in enough rain races, hardcore rain races, you know what's going to happen. And so I think that's why so many people on pit lane, in the media center, and wherever, racers who have the experience went, what? And however the answer came that time to go racing again, well, the inevitable happened. It was never a surprise. The big surprise would have been if there was no crash, if there was no drama right away. And indeed there was. Rode off a car, went yellow immediately, essentially, then rode around under yellow for quite some time, and then decided that it was time to go back to green again, and went back to green. And there was a point in there where it definitely seemed like the weather was improving a little bit. I get that there was, glimmer and glimpses of hope that the conditions would improve, but it sure seemed like we were getting updates pretty frequently, either from our friend the Racecaster on Twitter, or even just looking at our own little phone apps going, boy, that's a lot of green coming in overhead, heading to this area, and there might be small little pockets where we don't have a deluge of rain, but there was nothing that said, ooh, clear skies, or just clouds, dry clouds are coming our way. And went back to green, spin, crash, crash, spin, spin, crash, crash, spin. Had a yellow flag come out for a stalled car at the bus stop at about 11 a.m. And boy, we continued with a green flag at about 11:20, spin, spin, crash, crash. Then we had another yellow flag with another spin. We had another green flag at 11:36, spin, spin, crash, crash. And again, I'm just kind of generally saying that it obviously varied between the stretches, but I know, and I'll just close on this part here, before we got to 10 o'clock, so, if the last green that I mentioned was at 11:36, green flag number 15. Before we even got to 10 o'clock, I know, because I've listened to the folks tell me, that they were sending in a flurry of SMS messages straight to race control saying, please, stop this. Stop this. It is not safe. Our drivers are begging and pleading. Stop. No more green racing. And
I would say, to be honest with you, Marshall, and again, listening from afar, I was walking to the car as the drivers were recalled to restart the race. We've got the checkered flag, by the way, here now, so it's going to get a lot quieter in the next few minutes. And I was walking to the car. I was drenched. I was drenched when I got to that car. It was still tipping it down with rain at that point, tipping it down on the infield. So I'm not remotely surprised that with not a great deal of difference in those conditions in the following hours, that there was some disquiet amongst the teams. We'll come to other parts of the way in which the race was managed and the race meeting was managed. Strikes me this was not their finest hour.
Well, I just, again, knowing that the begging and pleading, please, we've lost the track, and we're being told this by some of the world's best sports car drivers, fearless people who love racing in the rain, are saying, I cannot control the vehicle. The water on track is making the car float, lift the tires off the ground. I'm no longer in control. These messages are flooding in, and that was happening, just prior to 10 a.m. And I'm looking here at the timestamp. 12:04 p.m. Tony Vielander stopped on course at the bus stop. Why? Because he couldn't see a dang thing. Stoved into the back of another car. Ended both of their races, I believe. I know, certainly mangled the front of his Ferrari. But more than 2 hours later, with not only the water on track, but also the visibility down to nil, we're still trying to race. So I completely get, and we went green flag again at 12:14. And everybody, I think, has seen the in-car footage clipped off on Twitter or otherwise, where Tony may as well have just put his hand over his eyes and covered them on his own going into the bus stop. This is just the part to me where I fail to understand how, when the drivers on track are saying, stop now, the teams are sending in a flurry of messages constantly saying, stop now, how we keep going for 2+ hours, tear up more cars, place more drivers at risk, and eventually get to a place where we call for a yellow flag at 12:33 again. Yellow flag number 17, course conditions, multiple cars off at multiple locations. Just on and on and on, till finally, mercifully, Graham, 5 minutes later, at 12:38, we get red flag number 2, which sealed the event. So I do need to be very clear here. I know that the folks in race control take safety as seriously as anyone. I know that there is certainly a desire to put on a motor race that lasts the advertised length, 24 hours. There's certainly a need with a new television partner that you want to give them some good stuff, some entertaining stuff. I'm not saying that the last two items overrode decision-making, but I am saying that knowing that safety is absolutely the number one thing that we collectively are tasked with, I struggle to understand how something that clearly was out of control, call it 2.5 hours before that final red flag came, something that was not working and untenable then was allowed to go on this long. I leave this event so thankful nobody was seriously injured, because we had too many opportunities for that worst case scenario to happen. So I hope IMSA comes out of this, runs through all of their procedures and decision-making processes, and if they find, maybe we should have listened a little sooner, then do that. And if they come to the determination that, nope, this is spot on, Pruett and anyone else saying we got it wrong, well, they're wrong. We got it right. 12:38 p.m. was the correct time to throw the red flag and stop the race. Then so be it. And I believe that's my very first soapbox moment of the episode. Hopefully
I
it'll
lost
be
my
the
button
last.
there for a minute. Well, I think it's a fair set of points to make. It was clearly a set of circumstances that caused a lot of the confusion, but more than that, concern to competitors and team members, but also to an awful lot of the fans watching and listening. Let's move on, though. And by the way, thanks to all of you that asked variations on that kind of question. There's a fair few of them, and that's no surprise in the circumstances. Let's move on, though, MP, to something where there appears to be more or less agreement that where IMSA got it right, and it's our one, and I hope only mention, of BOP.
What?
Indeed. So we've got questions from Anthony Ghosh from our friend Andrew Baxter. Hi there, Andrew. Your efforts during the Rolex 24 were much appreciated. Thank you very much. And Peter Santi. We'll go with Peter's question to start with from Facebook. He tells us, long-time listener, first-time poster, questioner, commenter. He's not sure what the modern equivalent of caller is. Appeared to him, the BOP for all three classes worked quite well, especially DPI, where 3 of the 4 manufacturers were able to lead at various points of the race, at least when it was dry. Wondering whether we agree with the sentiment. What we got there from Andrew talks about the Cadillac drivers. They're adamant they didn't have race pace ahead of the Rolex 24, but somehow 3 fastest drivers in the drive for a single lap were all Caddy drivers, NASA, Kobayashi and Jordan Taylor. And Anthony Ghosh from Twitter says, was this year's Rolex the fairest bopped race IMSA has yet had? What do you reckon, MP?
Well, this is the part where I provide an answer and knowingly start the clock on getting texts and emails from team owners and drivers saying, Pruett, you idiot. I think so. I think IMSA did a heck of a job. Granted, we did have Fernando Alonso frickin' pin drop silence during the race when he came in for his very first visit to the media center. Someone asked about straight line speed or otherwise, and competitiveness of the Cadillacs. This is while the Mazdas and Acuras were running away with things, and he was very no in terms of things being fair and mentioning that they were down on top speed and there was an inequity for sure. Our good friend Monsieur French Fry Sebastien Bourdais told us during, I think, our qualifying, post-qualifying video that the Fords were just BOP'd out of contention and, on straight pace. You would not argue that in the dry. Same with the Cadillac. There were a couple of models, for sure, that weren't necessarily happy and smiling. Always going to be the case, though. And to me, the question here is a perfect one. The closest yet, I would absolutely have to say so. Of course, there's going to be a couple of models that weren't as sharp as those team owners and drivers had hoped. But yeah, I would say they did a truly excellent job of getting things as close as they have. And I hope this is not just a sign of things to come, but hopefully a working practice that is something that is extremely repeatable. We hope that this is not the exception. That, hey, we got Daytona, great, and then everything falls apart from there. I hope this is just an example of, wow, okay, their balancing abilities have reached a point to where hopefully this is something where after Sebring, maybe we get one question about it, but going forward, for the most part, we no longer have to use the 3 most hated letters in sports car racing.
It certainly seems to me that their response to the pace we saw at the Raw was, I'm going to choose my words really carefully, amongst the most mature I've heard from a sanctioning body in quite some time. That some of the background information and OMP that you gathered from the comings and goings at the Raw before the 24 test gave them a lot of information that perhaps wouldn't be available to the race fan, that gave them the opportunity to make what I think was a well-based set of decisions here. And the fact that we didn't really have to talk about it during the race, well, what a pleasure that was. So, yeah, I think ultimately I completely agree with your analysis here. It did seem they got it absolutely right.
Let me grab a couple here, because I think we can knock through them fairly quickly. Our pal Baxter, Mr. Bacca, Graham and I, we have to tell you, not all, because we didn't see them all, but some of your posts during the Rolex 24 on Twitter, I don't know if I have laughed that hard in a media center ever. And Graham's face, Graham alerted me to them, and he just had the look of, holy bleep, and I'll just say this, you're pure gold, my man. We love you, and your sense of humor. It is
come and find me at a race meeting,
in ours. Yeah. Your question: Cadillac drivers were adamant they didn't have the race pace ahead of the Rolex 24. Somehow, the 3 fastest drivers in the dry over single lap were Cadillac drivers: Nazar Kobayashi and Jordan Taylor. Is it wrong to suggest some containers of silicon-based ballast, perhaps sandbags, may have left the cars after qualifying? I would not put it down to that, Andrew. I would say you've just mentioned 3 of the fastest Cadillac drivers, 2 of them in Nazar and Kobayashi, who, I mean, Alonso is also pretty amazing too, but Nazar and Kobayashi are just otherworldly talents. Jordan is certainly pretty darn close to them as well. Single lap pace. I mean, that's the thing. Drivers are not going to get too wound up if they're off a couple of tenths in qualifying for the 24. It's do we have to almost kill ourselves each lap in order to get within a tenth or two, or to maybe eke out a 1/10 advantage over the rest? That, honestly, is a big conversation that took place last year. The Acura team, for example, were saying regularly, hey, we can be fast, but the lengths we have to go to and the risks we have to take in traffic to try and keep up due to BOP, it's unreasonable. So if we could get the BOP to a place where we can produce speed without taking crazy risks to keep up with the rest, that'll be a happier middle ground, if you want to call it that. The Cadillac drivers were kind of in that having to do extraordinary things in the dry to get the lap time that they needed to be competitive. Obviously, things turned around a bit in the wet, and that's where we saw the Cadillacs, especially the Wayne Taylor and the number 31 Action Express entry, become the strongest there. So I didn't particularly see the sandbags that maybe you might have, but we love a good conspiracy theory. Let's go to Kevin Pinkston, who says, inquiring minds have to know, why was Timo Bernhard not able to actuate the fire bottle on his Mazda DPI while it roasted away in the back straight? Did he not know where it was? If he did know where it was, did it not work? I found the visual image of him standing by the car waiting for help to arrive to be both hilarious and unnerving at the same time. Thankfully, the driver was standing outside the car and not trapped inside during an accident. I don't have an answer for you, Kevin, on whether he was able to activate it. I would say that I don't believe it would have helped in any way, shape, or form, knowing that the engine cover seals off to the exhaust outlet, the little periscope that comes out of the back of the engine cover, the top of the engine cover pointed towards the back. That does seal off fairly well. And so the fire that was coming out of the exhaust, even if he hit the extinguisher, that is meant to do things below the bodywork, in the cockpit, etc. I really can't think of any way how it would have gotten to the fire coming out of the exhaust to stop that. I'd say the bigger question, and I went and looked and I haven't been able to find the full race broadcast yet online, but I just remember, Graham, you might have heard me shouting at the television when, again, fortunately the car was not ablaze, but from the time he came to a stop, and there was fire coming out before he came to a stop, from the time he came to a stop to when the very first external fire extinguisher was applied to it, I don't know how long that number, I don't know what that number is, but it seemed to be about 300% the amount of time it should have taken for the first response vehicle to be there. So again, not trying to just turn this into blame and complaint, but knowing that he wasn't sitting in the middle of the banking, right? So between big kind of untended area, but was on the exit of the bus stop where, I know that there are safety crews there. I've stood there, photographed, it's not as if they are 1 mile away. I know that we've got a race going on. They're not just going to rip onto the track while the race is going on and be unsafe. But part of me wonders, boy, since the bus stop in general tends to be the place where calamity happens the most at Daytona, spins, crashes, running into tires, you name it, I would just think there would not only be an over-provisioning of response people there due to the frequency of problems going on, but something that would allow someone to get to a car there in distress far faster than we saw. I don't have an answer yet as to why, but yeah, that's the part that actually struck me the most. And I'm not lying. I was yelling at the television in the media center when I saw that. Like, where are you?
Oh, you were. For some extended time, it was a long yell.
Sorry.
As opposed to a long yellow. Let's go through something. I'll go for one a little more light-hearted here. Adam J. Sharp from the USCR Reddit group says, who had the best in-race interview? Mike Hull gets his vote. I'm going to give one. It wasn't in the race, but just because of who it was and what it was about, and the press room was silent during this aspect of the interview, and that was Alex Zanardi came in, clearly upset having heard the news of Charlie Lamb's death, and that was a moment. Frankly, every time Alex came in was a moment. What an inspirational guy he is, and we can't say that too much, but that's not just because of the physical reality, but actually because of the person he is. And one of the things that was great around the entire week was hearing several people who've been involved with Alex's race career, and you did a fantastic podcast, MP. I mean, please, in a moment, give that a bit of a plug. But, George Howard Chappell, I had a long chat with George about Alex's time with him at Lotus and some hilarious stuff that went on there, and I was lucky to be one of the spectators to the outcome of that, and hearing a completely different aspect was just joyful. But that for me, Alex Zanardi, his contribution beyond his time behind the wheel was just excellent.
I will just throw this one in, and I'm probably going to get even more people saying, Pruett, you idiot. The interview that Rutledge Wood did with Jordan Taylor while Jordan was on the massage table, I don't know if anyone's ever going to forget that, because it was something I don't think we ever thought we would see. I don't know if anyone really asked for it, and I'm not picking on Jordan here. It's just half-clothed race car drivers being massaged, being interviewed by one of NBC Sports' biggest NASCAR personalities. I don't know if that was the best in-race interview, but dang it, Graham, when I think back to all the interviews that took place, that one sticks right up front. So maybe that says more about
Funny,
me than
that.
well, yeah, clearly I need more therapy, but yeah, that was like, we're actually doing this now, aren't we?
Well, I'm going to give you this. It's a slightly Irish phrase and directed at you, Jordan Taylor. Great crack.
There we go. Oh, hey, there we go. And I know that there were some who were just really not pleased with Rutledge, with good old Rut there doing his thing that he's been doing for years with NBC's NASCAR stuff. I loved having him there. And maybe my mindset to it is different than others, but what's the one thing we're always hoping for in sports car racing, Graham? The outside world to give a darn, right? There's just not enough people who know about it, who care about it. And if Rutledge doing what he does, being the man of the people, helping tell some fun stories and do silly things, if that brought in I'm sure it did, new fans from NBC's NASCAR content, or NASCAR fans in general, to look in on this Rolex 24 and hopefully maybe remember that it was a lot of good fun. I loved having him there, so that was great. Let me take this quickly from Kevin Frederico. Kev, thanks for always sending in questions every week on our lovely Week in Sports Cars presented by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. He says, hey, Marshall, how did the Big Eagle, that being Dan Gurney, and his band of wizards at All-American Racers, how are they able to make a 2.1-liter turbocharged four-cylinder Toyota engine generate so much power and reliability? It says, asking for a friend, and in brackets says Mazda/Yost. Had that question from a couple of other people as well, leading up to the race, and then afterwards for sure, Kev. Also had someone point out, I hate that I missed this, I'm the guy that normally is the one pointing these things out, that what was the record set at Daytona in 1993? How was that set? Well, it was with a small 2.1-liter turbocharged four-cylinder engine. What broke the record? A small 2-liter four-cylinder turbo engine. How unique is that? Big difference here, my friend, money and rules. There were gobs and gobs of money by comparison that were made available to Drino Miller and his team to make this fricking amazing Toyota. Again, badge is a Toyota because Toyota was primary funder, but this was a heavy AAR thing as well. But it's truly a case of spending big dollars to make a motor that generated crazy power, but was also, because of that money, because of the metals and just the design and the essentially the freedom, they made that thing super extra robust. And the same amount of money to do the same exact thing with the Mazda engine, I would say that is the definite difference. Not as if Mazda and their engine partner at AER, Advanced Engine Research, haven't spent plenty of money to try and make the best motor possible, but these were different planets. What was spent in the GTP era to make 1,000+ horsepower and to race all day at 800+, this just a lot of extra dollars that really don't fit a modern DPI budget, even on the manufacturer level. So just different times and building something that seemingly was never going to break because they had the money to make it that way.
We're going to go to Ryan Terpstra, who sent in his traditional 93,000 questions, all of which are quality. But Ryan, the one that's caught my eye is the one that says he's looking forward to seeing some compiled data for the lap times on the 10 and the 31 cars. Says that Fernando Alonso, Jordan Taylor, and Felipe Nasra seriously impressed him. Basically, who stood out to each of us? Well, I have to say, Fernando Alonso was rapid, and he was rapid at specific points in that race that really mattered, taking the fight to the rest, and then particularly when he got to the front, going away at the front, MP, raced well. It wasn't just lap time, it was the manner of his racing that actually appealed to me. Good, solid, aggressive in traffic, something which, let's face it, in his career in Formula One has not been something he's had to contend with. And I thought he did so with real control and maturity.
I will go beyond that a little bit. Well, how's this? Jordan Taylor's stint in the rain when he pulled out something like a 20 second gap on Acura's. That I thought was just mesmerizing to watch. Just of the other names that really stood out as having done things that caught my eye. Keep in mind, if I'm not mentioning names, it doesn't mean that they didn't do things. I just maybe didn't register with me. But Montoya in the rain, wow. Yeah, there's still a lot of miles left in our boy JPM. That was pretty amazing. Let's see. Mr. Canapino from the Juncos Racing Team. Again, someone that I would say I couldn't spot him in a lineup if I had to, and has zero profile here in North America. He did some pretty impressive things. I mean, Ricardo's team just had a very unpleasant debut in IMSA with their Cadillac DPI VR, but I think the driver whose name was the least known among their four-driver rotation, really impressed with what took place there. We'll say, let's see, and I'm just trying to run down through some other names of what I saw. It's silly to mention anybody in GTLM because they're all the best. I mean, collectively, they're all the best. I know that in GTD, I was quite impressed by some of Daniel Morad's efforts in the Monte class by land R8. Who else? Frankie Montecalvo. Again, I think he did some really good work as well in the Aim Vassar Sullivan Lexus. Jeff Siegel, too. Townsend Bell. That team, I love the composition of that team. Ian James, that guy is just, I don't care how old he is, that guy is just constantly awesome. He was in the WRT Audi. Who else? Trent Hinman. I think really, having known that he was a part of the BMW factory development program, now that he's been out of it for a little while, he not only continuing to star as part of the Meyer-Shank Racing Acura effort, but I just look at someone like Connor DeFilippi, knowing that he was a part of the Porsche development world. That kind of fell apart. Now here he is, Rolex 24 winner, along with the other success he's had as a part of the BMW family. I look at Trent and say, I hope a manufacturer is realizing that just because things might not work out with one brand doesn't mean another shouldn't consider bringing them back into their fold at least. What else? Jaron Bleekemolen, we just bow in perpetuity to him. That's the thing. Spencer Pumpelly, too, in the Magnus end. I know they didn't get all they wanted out of the race, but Pumpelly is, I feel dumb because I should just say everyone and or mention the couple who I thought didn't do anything particularly unique. But that's one of the cool things, though, and I can say this in all honesty. The level of talent at this year's Rolex 24, easily the best, I believe, that has ever taken part in that event. I think we said that last year, too, so it's only gotten better.
It was certainly a pretty stellar lineup, and I think I said to you more than once, I had a conversation as well with Scott Atherton in the fringes of the live show we did on the Friday, that whilst it perhaps had a less international feel this year, it was a huge American race, and I think that's a very, very good thing. It has truly now cemented its place back very firmly on the international calendar after some years in the kind of doldrums of the Grand Dam years where it was less relevant. Still very good racing, don't get me wrong, but it was somewhat international in the doldrums. Now, as with the event that I'm sitting here, this has become one of those events that the drivers that get that choice very firmly put it on their must-do list, and all the better for that. The Rolex 24 Hours at Daytona very firmly back in international. The international spotlight. Great stuff.
So we still have a ridiculous amount of IMSA questions, my friend. So let's do some attacking stints and get through as many as we can.
Let's try this one. Let's try this one from Mike Hogg. It's the flip side, if you like, to Fernando Alonso being awesome. Mike was asking whether or not you were as surprised, or we were surprised as he was, to learn that according to some mainstream media, a lot of motorsport sites should know better, not only did Alonso drive all 24 hours of the race by himself, the win also manned the pit box and delivered a baby or two. I get the point. I'm going to answer this one because we've had this with the WEC, with Fernando's introduction into the Toyota side of things. It comes back, I guess, to the point we raised a little earlier about the NASCAR coverage, etc. when you get these international Uber stars, there is a cost to their presence. And what that means is that you are in a position where you're, I guess, having to educate a new media audience and new public audiences to the fact that this is very much a very pure team sport. And at times they get it wrong. And times, the contribution those individuals make to what is absolutely a team effort is rather over-egged towards one side. Does that have its irritations? Yes, it does. Does it particularly irritate me when it's mainstream media that do it? Yes, it does. Am I in the vanguard of those that kind of point and shout when mainstream magazines that should know better say things like, I don't know, Jordan Taylor sets pole in Fernando Alonso's car? Yeah, that's completely ridiculous.
We did see a ridiculous headline about what was it? Yost sets pole for the Rolex 24.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is with all of this, what it comes down to in some instances is the algorithm that basically gets to most people, which is basically that's business taking precedence over, frankly, good reporting, and shame on you guys for doing that. And on the other instance, that's just jealousy is getting in the way, and that needs to stop. We all need to recognise that this was a stellar international grid with teams, drivers, manufacturers, sponsors, backers, and for that matter media with involvement here that really should learn to kind of coexist a little bit better than that. Fernando Alonso, let's make no mistake here, I thought was one of, if not the standout star of the 2019 Rolex 24 Hours at Daytona. He wasn't, however, the only star, and Fernando would be the first person to reflect that. I recall in the days when at Le Mans last year with that unbelievable display for pole position, his car, it was he that stood at the back of the garage, would not come forward until the man who actually set the pole lap was there to take the plaudits. He would not, and he is a quality guy on that front. Yes, we've seen some quotes from Fernando in the kind of the media about the significance of his performance and the team's performance. I take most of that with a pinch of salt. There are a lot of people there that are there to do one thing and one thing only, which is to report on every utterance Fernando Alonso. It was great to actually, by the way, catch up with your colleague on Racer magazine, Chris Medland, and talk about the kind of complete cultural differences that you have between Formula One and sports car racing. I'm still delighted that I'm able to do what I'm able to do, and you're able to do what you're able to do in sports car paddocks. It wouldn't be possible. Wouldn't be possible at Formula One. It wouldn't be tolerated in Formula One, and we can be grateful for that. Fernando is enjoying his time with us in these great races and these great race cars. And I think what you will find as time kind of moves forward is he realises there is a more freedom to actually speak what you and I might know as the truth.
Yeah, I would maybe offer a bit of a counter view on this. I try and think of the ecosystem that we fill and who plays what role in that ecosystem. And if I am thinking about the AP, the Associated Press, or a large national magazine or large national newspaper, I would not expect them to do anything other than look for the one hook or the two hooks that would interest their casual readers, casual folks who probably have never heard of this event, and think, what can I use for a headline to get them to pay attention or care? In reality, it's going to be Fernando Alonso this year or Alex Zanardi. The fact that however many did that and maybe over-presented the fact that Kamui Kobayashi was there to change the right front tire, Renger van de Zande was there to do the right rear tire, Jordan Taylor changed the left side tires and refueled, but it was truly just in support of Fernando driving for 24 hours. That might have been a little bit over the top. But I get, and I actually don't take too much of an issue with that approach, because again, if they went for the granular Mazda team, Yost, Oliver Jarvis did this and it's amazing and was on pole or whatever, no one reading those widespread outlets would know, care, nor to be the hook to bring them in. Talking about the ecosystem then, you hope, again, it's maybe a little longer term, bigger picture, you'd hope that a person would say, hey, I've heard about that Alonso guy. All right, cool. I'm going to read. Oh, hey, he's in America racing in his sports cars. Cool. Let me read about this. Maybe get interested. And if that person then gets converted to our world, then in theory, they would read Eraser.com, DailySportsCar.com, Gary Watkins on Autosport, Marcus Schurig in German, would start to look and go to the more granular sites that are going to give you the more hardcore info to then use and hopefully learn more. So I don't so much have an issue with that at all, just knowing that in theory, if that's what it takes to get people in, maybe that's okay to me. The other thing just going to mention quickly on the Alonso angle, and I just thought this was cute. So unfortunately we weren't there for the post-race press conferences, but Wayne Taylor Racing won the Rolex 24 Daytona. And here's all 4 of your drivers, plus Wayne Taylor. Questions, anyone? And Fernando Alonso, Jordan Taylor, Kamui Kobayashi, Jordan Taylor, Fernando, Jordan. Poor Renger is sitting at the end of the table looking like the kid whose parents forgot to pick him up at school. Just right. And so he and I happened to see him. So we kind of got towards the end of their overall time. And did anyone else have any questions? And I just raised my hand and just said, Renger. I felt bad for I love the kid, but I felt bad for him because here he is, having won the biggest race of his life. Here you are in the media center. Ask anything you want. Man, that kid was 0 for 30. Nobody even knew who he was, had a damn question for him. So I just want to make sure he got at least one question asked so he felt like he could sit at the adults table instead of the kids table. And because he's a great kid and has a lot of class, he sent me a really nice text a couple hours later. Thanks for asking me a question. But anyways.
You know what? He gives good answer. Well, he does give good answer, and he is a quality individual.
But this comes back to the, when you've got 4 drivers who want to race and nobody is, Kamui got 1 or 2, but barely. But when one of the drivers is truly invisible, it's like, yeah, okay, maybe collectively we aren't doing good enough of our job, because even the inside outlets that do nothing but or almost, nothing but sports cars are ignoring all but the 2 most popular drivers. So maybe I just contradicted my earlier answer.
There you go. Let's go for another couple on IMSA before we get into the other slings and arrows. One, actually a misfiled one, but I'll go for it because it's here anyway, which is from Nick Dovniak. What's up with JCDC Racing? Jackie Chan DC Racing missed the last 2 rounds of the Asia Le Mans Series and a big driver lineup change for the near future WEC. We said, I think, very early on in the Weekend Sports Cars to do with the Super Season that it was likely that we'd see a number of teams still sticking with the commercial arrangements they have on a calendar year basis. There's lots of reasons why that would be a sensible move. With various budgets. And I think what you're going to see for the remainder of the WEC season, and certainly beyond that, is that the Jota Sport name will be coming back into things very much more. Jota Sport obviously operating the Jackie Chan DC Racing. They're actually here at Bathurst operating the R Motorsports Aston Martin attack. And by the way, happy birthday to the team boss, Sam Hegner. He's 40 yesterday, and I've not seen him yet, but he'll be getting a very hard time indeed from me about that one at 54. Still got some life experience to deal out to him. But I think you'll see the Jota Sport name coming back, and correctly so. The Jackie Chan DC Racing efforts, it's a perfectly fair question. There have been some changes politically in Malaysia in the recent past. I suspect that's had a part to play, a significant part to play in matters for the 3 Malaysian guys. That's a damn shame because they are 3 men of absolute quality and three names I think that deserve to be in at the very sharp end of the sports car racing paddock. And I think and I hope we'll see them back. Jasmine Jafar wearing tan, Nabil Jeffrey, race winners in the FIWC. And I would say this. None of what's happened is down to their lack of application or their lack of talent. It is good to see David Heimeyer Hansen, in particular, back in the FIWC. And he's more than welcome there. Will Stevens, I think, will play a great part leading up to Le Mans, and great to see Jordan King getting his chance in LMP2, and I'm sure he'll be absolutely excellent. But I think what we're going to see, we've got a period of time where, well, David Cheng and his backers, let's wait and see what gets pulled out the fire here. But I think the road ahead, I think you're going to see a lot more of Jota Sports and perhaps a little bit less of Jackie Chan DC Racing.
Grab a couple of other ones I can answer quickly. Our pal Buddy Campbell says he sent this in second week trying to get it in. And we also mentioned if you send in a question and you really wanted to answer it, we don't get to it the first go round, maybe even the second. Keep sending it in. We usually will eventually get to it when possible. This is certainly the case with Buddy. It says with IMSA separating DPI and P2, could IMSA be open to more chassis manufacturers and DPI? Same rules as now, just more than the 4 they currently choose from. Would that be better or worse for potential OEMs? I think that's going to be an absolute requirement, Buddy, once we get to the next generation of DPI regulations. Obviously, we have Mazda is the only current user of the Riley Multimatic chassis in DPI form. We do firmly believe that the Blue Oval Ford will be the second confirmed user of that. We have Cadillac as the sole user of the Dallara P2. Then we have Nissan right now as the sole user of the Ligier, and we have Acura as the sole user of the Oreca. Do I think that there could be a desire for a little bit more flexibility for folks to not have to double up with manufacturers, so that Oreca is supplying 2 or 3 manufacturers with their DPI solutions? Very possibly. So I like the idea of it not being actually set to any specific number in IMSA, Buddy. I'd rather have IMSA say, if you have a desire to build a chassis to our regulations and a manufacturer wants to partner with you to make that happen, who are we to limit business opportunities? Maybe that could be a good thing that reinvigorates, Graham, some specialist race car chassis constructors who maybe have been on a little bit more of hard times of late than we would like. I'll go to Matt Hawkins next, who says, with IMSA's LMP2 looking at potentially a 2-car field for the rest of the season, where would IMSA officials go to try and secure the future of this class? I won't get into details here because I still have to make the call and hopefully do a little story about it if they want to talk about it. But I did learn of another LMP2 chassis that might be entering IMSA's P2 category here sometime very soon from America. So not a fly-in entry, but actually the potential of adding another full-timer. So we'll try and bring that to you. Holger Opelt. Holger, I think this might be your first question you've sent in. If not, I apologize for missing the first. Let's see. You ask, what is a lifetime of a DPI engine? How many engines are being used per season per car? And do they definitely have to change it after the Rolex 24? Lifetime, it's frankly up to them. Can try and stretch them. They would obviously, for the sake of being financially intelligent, try to get as many miles out of the motors as possible. But yes, I can't really think of any team that would not look to change their motor after the Rolex 24 and at least have something fresh. If we're talking race time and probably qualifying as well for Sebring, could someone decide to do practice sessions, initial practice sessions at Sebring with a Rolex 24 motor? Possible, but I know that they would absolutely want to have something fresh to go racing with when we get back to Florida. Where else should we go, my friend, Mr. Goodwin, in IMSA?
David Harby from Facebook MP asks, he says, this is a lighter question. What's the story behind the pin-up girl logo on the Starworks cars on the Monteplast Audi, which of course Starworks serviced last year at the Rolex 24? Is it because of the dark secrets that lie behind the smiling face of Peter Barron?
Oh, it's 100%. Oh, this is just a tragically flawed and broken human being whose only form of expression to the world is to use somewhat dated pinup girls, something a bit passé. So I think we're going to see it. We're going to be seeing him, I'm sure, at some point in an issue of Busted magazine. The fine. But
Peter Barron, what can you say? I mean, there's nothing we can say at this point that would make him sound worse than we believe he is.
It's nothing a prosecutor hasn't already said in a Florida court.
Absolutely.
So, kidding aside, David, this is something that Peter started doing 8-9 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, with the StarWorks Daytona prototypes. And, yeah, I think it's just kind of an old-timey thing that they enjoy doing. And since, for the most part, they are not betrothed into a big, giant corporate sponsor, they kind of do their own thing. Also, if you saw it, hopefully you didn't because you wouldn't be able to unsee it, but they also brought back one of the old things they did from those DP days of putting little rectangular cartoon screen captures or similar next to their driver names, and so rather than just have their national flag, next to Ryan Deal, there was, I believe, a screen capture from The Family Guy, possibly, or American Dad, and it was of a farmer standing, let's just say, uncomfortably close
very
behind
closely.
A sheep. Yes. And, you could make the inference of there being a certain familiarity between man and sheep that was
emotionally
being attached.
familiar.
Yes, that was being attached to young Mr. Dial. So what I love about Peter and Ryan and that team is they do take themselves very seriously, sometimes too seriously. But when they're not taking themselves too seriously, they don't take themselves seriously at all. And they try to have some fun. And so good on them for just playing it up, and also good on IMSA for not trying to be overly parental and say, no, that does not fit our... Just have some fun. So, will the pinup girls last forever? Again, I'm the guy who's never gotten that stuff. The grid girls with the silicone falling out of the tops and whatnot. Look, I love women like you wouldn't believe. I love my wife like you wouldn't believe. That stuff I've just always been like, really? This is whack. So, yeah, don't know how much longer that'll be on the cars there, but as long as Peter, I'm sure, has the ability, it'll stay on.
Good stuff. I think we can move on and do a few of the general questions. We've got a couple of WC questions, actually. Well, in fact, one WC question this time. There'll be more coming in, I'm sure.
Truly,
it comes
one.
from absolutely one. Ruslar, WC Reddit group. Entry list to the WC at Sebring has been published. The vast majority of drivers have an asterisk next to them indicating subject to the receipt of the license. What does this mean? I think I'm right. But this is the first WC race of the calendar year. Licenses tend to be issued for a calendar year. It is an FIA World Championship, and as such, when you present your safety gear, etc., for examination on arrival, as all drivers must, they will want to see that they've got a current racing license for 2019. Pretty certain that that's exactly what that will be. It's simply a mark of it being the first race of the season. We've seen it before in the case of some drivers that haven't been through the process of approval to take part in the race meeting at the WEC, but it's an FIA process, of examination of the documentation, and for that matter, all of the safety gear as just part of the kind of standard process for a race meeting. We did see as well, of course, some expected changes for the entry list for Sebring, including, of course, the confirmation that we're going to see another one-off entry in the WC for the Corvette racing team with the C7R. We talked about that in the wake of the one-off appearance at Shanghai. That will mean, with the presumption at this stage that Corvette will attend, as usual, the Le Mans 24 Hours, that rather likely the factory team will have actually taken part in 50% of the Super Seasons races with Shanghai, with Sebring, and both Le Mans 24 Hours. So they are, by the way, extremely welcome to that. So, yeah. We now can see who's going to be there and who's not going to be there for the 1,000 miles of Sebring. So no Ginettas, I'm afraid. More to come, I hope, from Lawrence Tomlinson and his wacky band in West Yorkshire when we get closer to Le Mans. But we will see a Corvette in the WC race alongside the pair. They'll be racing the following day for IMSA. MP, where do you want to go?
Well, I just want to mention something because I just took a look here. A little pause here on the Week in Sports Cars presented by Cooper Tires, the Justice Brothers, the fine Graham Goodwin and Daily Sports Car, and you, our dear listeners. I was just taking a look here. So this morning at 7 a.m. California, my Weekend IndyCar podcast went live with a fairly popular guest in Connor Daly, at least in North America. He has a pretty solid following. And just on a weekly basis, now that we have 3 weekly shows, IndyCar, Inside the Sports Car Paddock, which just debuted, and also this, Weekend Sports Cars, the IndyCar show is and has always been the strongest performer in terms of numbers. Not a surprise. IndyCar is the number 2 form of motor racing in terms of popularity in the U.S. So, again, not a surprise. Weekend Sports Cars, though, continues to inch closer and get closer. Pretty fun here, Graham, just looking at our very first Inside the Sports Car Paddock episode, which went up about 5 hours after the Weekend IndyCar. It's the first, so it has no following behind it, and it's done so far about 76% of the traffic that the Weekend IndyCar has done, which has a 5-hour head start on it. So, just saying, like, wow, who knows? Maybe it's just one episode where people liked it and no one's going to listen next week, but I love the fact that this new little show we decided to float on the 1-year anniversary of the Weekend Sports Cars, it's doing pretty good traffic, my friend. So it'll be even better when you add in some of your interviews next week. So there you go, little service message for everyone, and back to our regularly scheduled programming. Let's see, where should we go? Well, Mr. Goodwin, you have ably, and with a high degree of expertise, cleared out the Weckasm ACO category and all one question. Why don't we move right into General? Why don't we move right into General? And I'll pick up here with Victor Rad, with one of the greatest Twitter handles, at TWRJag, who says, I've seen a bit of, quote, debate in some areas after this year's 24 Hours of Daytona that went straight into mentioning the deluge of Sebring 1965. How can the realistic explanations about the risks of today's racing in the rain be gently guided around those rose-tinted specks of nostalgia? Boy, that is genuinely an awesome question, Monsieur Rad. A couple of things. I would just say, in the Inside the Sports Car Paddock episode that we did, my pal Jeff Brown, Supreme Race Engineer, explained some key things about why racing this year was untenable, and it was by and large due to ride heights and the fact that water as a fluid cannot be compressed. And so when race cars, as he mentioned, the dynamic ride height of the Nissan Onroc DPI at the front of the car, the floor itself, sitting 25 millimeters off the ground, 1 inch. And in many places there was more than 1 inch of water to run over. But also, with the way pretty much every sports car now with a significant splitter on the front is profiled, it noses up a little bit. It opens up on the leading edge, and that is meant to act as a funnel, to funnel in a high volume of air into and through the splitter, and to then accelerate that air and then expel it out the back. And so it's this creating of rushing air coming in, the low pressure that it creates, the downforce it generates, and then expelling it out the back. And as he mentioned, and again, I hope you listened to the episode, this part in particular, you have a dynamic, whether it's with a prototype or a GT car, where it is shoveling a massive amount of water in using that splitter profile beneath the front of the car, and it then, you have this high volume, basically a big wedge of water coming at the floor of the car, which is very low to the ground. And in that situation of trying to compress that water, it won't compress. And so that's where you start getting the front of the car, if not the entire car, lifting off the ground, mostly lifting off the ground, taking a severe amount of downloading off of the tires, and that's where the aquaplaning happens and the loss of control happens. So ride height plus modern aerodynamics and that splitter profile that just shovels water in, it's got to go somewhere. And since it can't be compressed, it just lifts the car up. So that's one big thing. And so the counter to that, back to 1965, ride heights were a heck of a lot higher back then. Massively higher. Plus we didn't have the same aero profile just funneling water into the lowest point of those cars back then. I'd also say tires would be another huge thing to consider. If you think of the modern day slicks, very wide, those are also problematic when it comes to water. And you compare that to a 65, where again, just pure comparison, we would have, in many instances, narrow, if not comparatively knobbly tires that would be perfect for getting through the water. And I learned that lesson, Graham, actually going through driver's school at Sears Point Raceway here in Sonoma in my Formula Ford, which was in that class that used slicks. They weren't super wide, but they were capable. And in our driver's school class as well, they also had Formula Vs, the smaller Volkswagen-powered cars, which had truly, 100 millimeter wide tires, 125, just a couple inches wide. They were super narrow, almost non-existent, and it happened to be raining very heavily during a number of sessions. And oddly enough, all of the Formula Vs kicked our butts. They were faster than basically all of the Formula Fords, and that's because those lovely little tires just carved through the water, and they were able to make proper contact with the circuit. Those of us on the wider slicks were not as fortunate. So I'd say those the two things in particular, Victor, the higher ride heights in 65, and also in many cases the narrower tires, would make living in a huge deluge of rain much easier to contend with than today. So let's see, I'm going to grab one here and throw it. We actually got a bunch of great questions from Victor, but
yeah, we did.
Let's see. All right. This comes in from Trewavasaurus. I think I said it without making up a new word.
I think you did.
We've gotten this far in the show, for an hour and a half or so. I have yet to make up a new word. So Graham, our pal Trewavasaurus, says, this is a question about the long-term homologation of GTs and their road-going counterparts. In the past, we've had four-wheel drive cars turn rear-wheel drive only, and now the Porsche 911 has turbos in almost every variant, despite its GT3 or GTE cars being naturally aspirated. These are pretty simple changes, but what about the future? And what is your, quote, line between an acceptable change? Future road-going sports cars have hybridization on the agenda? Sure, the NSX GT3 has no hybrid, but it also has a large twin-turbo V6 to play with. With further downsizing of road car engines, do you think we could start to see hybrids homologated into GT racing, like the Prius and Japan's Super GT? So what do you think? The line between the cool things you can buy on the road, not all that technology is allowed on the racing versions, do you think there should be more allowance for road authenticity?
I think the answer is it's almost inevitable. I think it will come. I think there have been moves towards it. I know it's been something that SRO have very much opposed in the GT3 arena. GTE, I think, is going to be determined by what comes forward from the competing manufacturers. I think there is openness to considering that when you get to the stage where that technology is accessible commercially, financially, not just for a factory team, but also for the privateer teams that actually then will take up those cars in maybe year two, and who, by the way, provide a great deal of the financial viability for GTE, GTLM. So I think the answer is it will come. Without a shadow of a doubt. It's quite a while, remember, since you'll recall MP, the 911 GT3 based hybrid car that, from memory, didn't that come in as an invitation class car at Petit Le Mans one year?
Yep.
And came very close to winning the Nürburgring 24 Hours until not the hybrid system, but the engine failed. But I think it'll come. Quite when it will come, I think we may be around half a decade yet before it becomes a realistic prospect for a next kind of round of regulations. But I see it as being inevitable. The reality is you see more and more and more cars on the road, not just the high-performance sports cars, but some very vanilla white goods level stuff as well, that has some form of hybrid drive included. Once you're getting to that stage, it does mean that the technology is becoming more mainstream. That means that the unit cost comes down. It means the serviceability becomes more viable. And there is a reality that cannot be ignored if you're trying to keep your racing product relevant.
Should we tell folks that we are launching the new Goodwin Pruett hybrid sports car system, which is indeed stolen from little toy airplanes where you have the prop and a rubber band and you wind up the propeller until the rubber band cannot twist anymore and let go? We're thinking it's going to add somewhere between 1/10 to 2/10 of a horsepower deployed over about 3 seconds. So we're going to bring that to market.
I've actually come up with a much better idea than that. Just get a bigger elastic band and twist it for longer.
Ooh, see?
Yeah, no. Yeah, see, you hadn't thought of that, had you? That's why you pay me for the brains.
Hasn't come across my R&D desk yet, so we'll benchmark that when possible. Where should we go next, my friend?
Let's have a quick look. Cookie Monster FL from the USCR Reddit group. Thanks us very much for hosting the podcast live at Daytona. Really enjoyed the time listening to some interesting responses. So did I. From us, from Mazda, and from Derek Bell's son, whose name Justin. That's the boy. He passes on his good wishes to Mazda. Their bad luck there. Asked both of us what drive surprised us both in the Friday and Saturday races. Asked me in particular, do I see any chance of Alex Zanardi making more one-offs, maybe in the WC, on-track and off-track press was infectious, particularly seeing him bob and weave through the pedestrian traffic on his scooter. Number one, I'd love to see Alex anytime, anywhere he chooses to actually, don his helmet again. Would I like to see him at the Le Mans 24 Hours? Of course I would. Do I think that's going to happen soon? I think it's possible. I mean, the thing to mention here about the commercial aspect, two things. One, his performance was certainly at a level that would justify selection, or rather would not count against selection. The second thing is, he's a factory driver. You've got to look at what value BMW got from his presence there. And the answer is a very large amount indeed. Would that same impact be made at the Le Mans 24 Hours? Proportionately, possibly not quite as much. He is a much better known figure, I think, on the continent of Europe than perhaps he was in North America. But nonetheless, I think that would be part of the equation, it's got to be said, well, it's not been the highest profile factory GT program in the WEC from BMW. The introduction of Alex Zanardi to do a one-off there, or somewhere else of that matter, might well be something they would consider for the reasons of the media and marketing value he would bring to it. And frankly, whatever reason it is, I'd just like to see an awful lot more of Alex Zanardi. He is a joyful individual in every possible regard. So absolutely yes, I'd love to see that. We left MP with some really some excellent questions that are under the general category, but actually do cut across some of the series that we know and love. Let's go with another one, Victor Rad, who says, at the start of the sports car season in 2020 looks crowded with Daytona, Bathurst, WEC at Interlagos, and the Asia Le Mans series at the Bend. Are discussions active enough to ensure the potential calendar clashes are resolved? I hope so, is the honest answer. There's some real exciting possibilities. I think we've talked about the Bend. I've got a conversation with the owners of that track later this week here. Looking forward to being down at Adelaide with the Asia Le Mans series next year. But yeah, the enigma for me is what happens after Daytona with Interlagos currently WC the week after, which of course, if Bathurst doesn't move, means there would be a direct clash, and that would be a real shame. So my understanding is that there is an active discussion with the various parties to make sure that some clear blue water is put between them if they possibly can. Let's wait and see whether or not they can make that happen. It does revolve around some other kind of constraints, though, for one or two of those race meetings. I don't expect Daytona to move, of course. The FIA have approved that calendar. the race that may have a bit of flexibility, should they choose to exercise that, would be the Bathurst 12 Hour. Let's wait and see what happens from that.
Let's see. Why don't I grab one here from Christopher Mitchell? And Christopher, I know you've sent this in more than once. You said a slight variation on a question I submitted previously. When a driver comes to an endurance race from a country with a different time zone, did the team try and put them in the car in a stint that's in sync with their body clock? Great question. This week is a case in point. Daytona last weekend, Bathurst this weekend. I don't know how many drivers are doing both, but there must be a few. I know drivers try to alter their body clock incrementally an hour or so at a time before traveling by going to bed earlier, staying up later. Is this also taken into consideration? And further to this, do you guys and your colleagues do anything to stay sharp for races? The great David Brabham told me in all the years that he has traveled, whether it's Formula One, sports cars, you name it, he reckons the body clock adjusts by about an hour per day. And so the joke was, for many of us traveling a long distance to Le Mans, our body clocks are just about right when we're getting on the plane to go home. So, but to your point, I don't know if I haven't honestly heard. There probably are some teams that are smart enough to do, as you mentioned, try and say, hey, so-and-so's coming in from Belgium, and maybe we need to try and get them in the car, in this timeline or that timeline. But, the other reality is, there's usually a couple of days of practice and/or qualifying before we get to the race. So in theory, if it's a 5-hour time change, time difference, or similar, whatever it might be, in theory, by the time they're going to get into a major endurance event on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and then climb into a car on Saturday for the first time, maybe even a Sunday, you'd think the body clock issue wouldn't be that much of a deal. If it was I got here on day one and in day two we're racing, might be more of a situation than Christopher, as we hear radicals being what they're named after, radical in the background. I'll just mention that depending on which direction I've gone, whether it's east or west, I know if I head to Le Mans with the time that would leave here in San Francisco, catch that flight, get into CDG, pick up the hire car, get out to the track, or get out to Le Mans General. Hard to catch real proper sleep on the flight, knowing that we'd be leaving at effectively 12 or 1 in the afternoon and landing, what is body clock-wise just around or a little bit after midnight. And, effectively I'm climbing in a car, having to do that, whatever it is, 2-hour drive from Paris out to Le Mans at the time when my body's telling me to go to sleep. And so I'm a person who truly dislikes energy drinks and tries to avoid them at all costs. But in these situations, I would be known to have a Red Bull or 3 to try and effectively stay up and get on to French time. And I might nod off at around 8, 9 p.m., but just do my best there to stay up and get on to the local time as best as I could. Last thing is, I have been trying to do the other part you mentioned of, okay, I'm going to be going a few hours one way or the other before I leave each day, the days leading up to that flight, maybe try and get up a little bit earlier or whatever it might be to try and adjust to that. So no doubt that this is actually a pretty big part. And Graham, I would say you might deal with this more than most in our industry, knowing that, good Lord, man, you fly all over the place. And I don't think even you know what time zone you're on half the time.
I did make some fundamental errors from time to time. I mean, genuinely, you do forget what day it is, and we're 11 hours different from my home here, in Bathurst, which is about 3.5 hours outside Sydney, by the way, back to just outside London in the UK. So that's a fundamental shift with obviously Daytona in between. To answer one part of the question, by the way, it's 21 drivers are doing the double between Daytona and Bathurst this weekend. So they've all had to make that adjustment. For some of them, I can tell you that they've taken their time getting here. They've taken their time to kind of adjust, and with the various commitments they've actually got the track, and apologies for another little batch of radicals as they blast by, that they look in pretty good shape. Not something I tend to hear terribly much from the drivers that is an issue, but they surely will struggle as we do, tend to be in rather bit of physical condition, the likes of my good self, but it is a problem. I tend to basically have as much of the recovery day or two as I possibly can after a long-haul flight, but that's, when you add that up, a lot of long-haul flights, and come back, sit down with a cup of tea, and then wake up 3 hours later because I've fallen asleep in the chair. But, I'm afraid the human body is what it is, and you do what you can with the available resource, and that includes energy.
And brain power. Let's see, where else should we go here? How about Steve Smith Jr. from Facebook? Hey, guys.
Hey.
It was great meeting up with you at Daytona. I hope your travels back were uneventful. Said, hey, the live show was a lot of fun. It was one of the highlights of their trip. It was great meeting you guys in person as well. For me, I know that you did, Graham, earlier. I hope you guys get to do many more, which we will. Says, hey, seems like we'll be heading to Sebring for the 12-hour. It's all Graham's fault. He talked us into it. It'll be my son's first time going, and my first in over 30 years. Any advice or tips for us folks who've never been or haven't been in a very long time? And will there be another live show at the 12-hour? Take care. Talking about the doing another live show, and I don't know exactly who it will be with, if it's with a manufacturer, a team, or whomever, but I'm fairly confident that we will indeed be doing some form of live show, so stay tuned on that. As someone who has not been to Sebring probably as many times as I have, Graham, why don't you give us some thoughts about the things you've enjoyed in the trips that you have made and what the Smith family and others might make as appointment viewing?
I think what you need to do, particularly Steve, strip to the waist and possibly in body paint right across your chest and your back. Free hugs given. Walk through Green Park and you'll have a fabulous, fabulous time. No, please don't do that. That would be unwise. I think the answer is, for me, the paddock there is an absolute joy. We don't yet know what the vibe is going to be with the expanded paddock with the WEC now being there as well. But the paddock, I must kind of walk up and down that paddock literally dozens of times a day when I'm there at the 12 hours of Sebring. And I've no doubt it'll be much the same with the WEC guys as well, as we'll wait and pause while the Radical SR3s blast by once again. Beyond that, there were some fantastic viewing spots. Turn 10, which is where there is something. I'll be coming to a question about something tribal just shortly. Turn 10 certainly worth a look. If you can get out to the outside of turn 17, that is absolutely well worth a look. With a raggedy edge there for the cars there, and as well as that turn 1, massively quick turn at Sebring. Some great viewing spots. There's plenty of time with so much track action. My view would be get around the circuit as best you possibly can through one of the support races, see which spots plural you enjoy, and just keep repeating.
Where else should we go? Why don't you pick one or two, brother?
Let's have a quick look at this one. Jamie Bender from Facebook says, with this being Sean Heckman's last year doing the live video feed with Magnus Racing, what are the chances of you two picking that torch for next year? It could be a great time. Right. Okay.
Well, first of all, I now have to revise my earlier answer to my favorite interview during the Rolex 24 because I'd forgotten about it until we got to Jamie's awesome question. I don't know if it was an interview as in one person asking questions to another, but the footage of Sean Heckman heckling the living bleep out of pit reporter Jan Beekes using a bullhorn while Jan was on live television and him yelling at Jan to shut up, Jan, as Sean and Ryan Eversley were sitting behind there running the live Magnus stream. Oh my goodness, I cried with laughter when our pal Tony DeZino from Michelin showed that clip to me. Oh, that was delightful. Was bummed to read in the Magnus pre-race racing release that Sean said this will be his last year doing the live Magnus feed. Since we have to report on the race, and that's not really something that Sean or Ryan or their cast of awesome folks have to do, it'd be hard for us to take it over because we're kind of being paid to be there to do other things. I would say that I seriously hope that some other good folks step in to keep it going because it's all kinds of awesome and it needs to happen and it's just the best. We'll also say that with our friends Tommy Kendall and the son of Derek Bell Justin and their Torque show, it was great to see some really good crowds forming around their tent while that was being aired, and it seemed like they did some really good things too. So I would just say, Jamie, that while the two of us doing it, well, first of all, it would die after we did it, so that would be its permanent end. But yeah, if not Sean, I'm hoping that Ryan and some others from the Magnus/Dinner with Racers world can fill in and keep that sucker going. And then we also have the great new Torque Show as well, being a solid addition to IMSA. So good stuff on the live stream bits coming from the paddock and pit lane as well. So may they never go away. David Cody, you say here, any chance IMS would dump the Brickyard 400 and schedule an IMSA race on the road course? I'd love to see a 6-hour race. Like you, David, I'd love to see it. And I know that IMS President Doug Bowles has a desire to have IMSA back. So I don't want to say that mentioning that means that there are ongoing talks and it's going to happen, but I do know that there seems to be a recognition that, boy, it would be great to have them back. Well, actually, they've never had IMSA, they've had Grand Am, but it'd be great to have sports car racing back. I also think the quality of the product compared to the Grand Am days, even if we just think back to the early days of IMSA when it was reformed in 2014, what's going on today is pretty serious, Graham. Just the buzz in the paddock, the amount of happiness, the general feeling. Lots of folks. I've gotten all kinds of input from folks on social media, in particular, saying, "Hey, I knew about it, never really cared about it, never really paid attention, but man, I really need to, and I did, and I watched the 24-hour and whatnot." A lot more people starting to realize that IMSA's got something really good going on. So I think that might coincide with something here in the future where IMS realizes, yeah, we need to have them on our calendar. So, David, I know it's a question of is there any chance? I think it's going to need to become a reality at some point here.
That's good to hear. And like I said earlier, it's becoming, I think, a very much more important part of the overall US racing scene, and that's got to be a very good thing. Taking things a little way away from US, or rather difficulties of getting into the US, Jerry Robert from Facebook, Jerry Robert Southern from Facebook says, with Mike Conway's passport issues in mind, how common is it for drivers and people working a race who reside out of the country where races contested to have difficulties? He knows that Simona de Silvestro had this difficulty once, but it's more common than one might think. It's reasonably common. It tends to be visas rather than passports, and the issues tend to be around multiple entry. Correct, and apologise to the driver concerned if I'm talking out of turn here. Wasn't it Adam Pruett had the problem the last year, and that was to do with multiple entry for work purposes, which is tending to be a particular issue, because of course you, for the most part, you come in for the Raw, maybe go home, then come back for the race. Less of an issue if you stay in the United States. So the answer is it does happen. I've heard certainly of issues with late visas for China, for instance, but it tends to be multiple entry for work purposes into countries which have a visa requirement. That's what it was.
There we go. Let's see. Dean Ackerman says, Marshall, what do most of the pro photographers use to protect their camera gear during a monsoon, like we had during some of the sessions during the event? I've seen Gore-Tex rain gear at my local camera store, but I've heard it offers limited protections. These hazards make me appreciate the rain action photos even more. Well, Dean, let's just say that a guy that looks a lot like me, who also happens to shoot photographs, has done everything from use dedicated multi-$100 Gore-Tex waterproof pieces of equipment to protect my gear to, hey, you see that little small wastebasket over there with the plastic garbage liner in it and how it's no longer there? All the way down to that, of maybe forgetting it or not having it or leaving it in the hotel and having to go a little bit MacGyver in using some form of plastic something. I've seen folks, and I might have even done it myself, using a large Ziploc bag, cutting open the end so to poke the end of the lens through, and then using some tape to try and seal that before going outside. Yeah, there's professional stuff you can buy. There's some stuff that's not too expensive as well. It's all some sort of plasticky whatever, which can be used. And I think in most instances it works fine. The big kind of Gore-Tex item that you mentioned, that's what I use more often than not. It's meant to fit a big 500mm lens and everything behind it. It's got perfect holes in places and locations for a monopod and to put your hand through and to see through the back. So that's why it costs hundreds of dollars. But yeah, we get kind of the Sanford & Son plastic garbage bags to Ziploc bags to dedicated gear, and for the most part it all works. The funny thing is I have spent more money on buying really good rain gear for my camera equipment than I've ever actually bought for myself. So I usually come back rather wet because I'm an idiot. Meanwhile, my camera gear is dry as a bone. So I don't know. Maybe I should invest in a little bit of money on myself next time.
Let's go with a final couple of three. We'll go with Anti-Ghost one from Twitter. Graham, was I able to leave the country with my level 5 shirt? Was it seized by the feds as evidence? It wasn't mine, it was yours, MP.
Yes.
Marshall Pruett, I should tell you, turned up to the Rolex 24 Hours at Daytona having scoured either his garage or indeed eBay for a range of fabulous heritage kits. Two Michelin shirts, jackets in particular, modelled throughout the week proudly by Tony DeZino, which I think was a 90s one, was it not, MP? And John Love from Michelin, who had an 80s one, which was much coveted by the senior management team at Michelin, but with other goodies as well, and one of them was that rather garish team shirt from Level 5, so that is back in the Marshall Pruett goodie bag. So no, didn't manage to get out there. I'd like to finish the show, though, with a couple of questions which around this great event, since these pesky radicals continue to interrupt me, both around the Bathurst 12 Hours. The first comes from, well, a guy I'm going to be meeting in just, I hope, at just a few hours' time, Floodman from USCR Reddit group, and as well as which the WC Reddit group. Australians have tribal rivalries. We don't have time for entertainment because everything's trying to kill us, even the sky. With regards to the upcoming Bathurst 12 Hours, entries are down this year with a big hit to the B, C and I classes, that is the Porsche Cup cars, the GT4 and the Invitation classes. What have been the reasons for this drop-off in entries? The fraction of GT3 cars now goes from half to almost 3/4. Do we think it's a good or a bad thing for the event? I'll answer that. The answer is I expect this race to become more or less, or actually an all GT3 event within a very few years. Its place as the season opener for the Intercontinental GT Challenge is completely unchallenged. It is with shadow of a doubt the premium GT race events on the international calendar now stands right up there, I think, with Spa and with Nürburgring. And I do expect there to be a further increase in the kind of level and quality. I think actually having a few fewer cars here is a good thing. Traffic up at the top of the mountain is a bad thing. The GT4 cars for two reasons. One is they're a little bit slow across the top of the mountain, and the level of respect that sometimes has been shown by some of the pro drivers in the GT3s has been lacking. GT4 has been a mesmeric success in North America and Europe, far, far less so in Asia and in Australia for slightly different reasons, but it is not picking up momentum here. And in fact, the one car we've had dropping off the entry here is a GT4 Ginetta. No takers for drivers for that car, so it's a much smaller entry. It's a shame, without a shadow of a doubt, that I think we're going to see a continuation of that retraction, but I'm guessing that GT3 will continue its success, particularly in light of the fact that the level of manufacturer interest in the IGTC is growing. Two more confirming yesterday that they will be entering. Ferrari, who are here, Honda, who are not, and will be the baton next time around. So that makes, I think, is that 8 or 10 factories? I'm afraid I'm missing that particular fact. So IGTC is becoming a proper thing now, with the races on 5 continents this year, with Kyalami added to the California 8 hours, to Spa 24 hours, to this race, and of course the Suzuka 10 hours. So it's beginning to gain momentum. It's a matter now of actually what comes next.
It's something that I still want to get to before it gets too small, and maybe before it gets absorbed by the full board that might be the Intercontinental Series. But where else should we go with the last couple of maybe Bathurst-centric questions, my friend?
There's one more, and uniquely, it has never happened before. And I've apparently been told I've got to say hello to Jackie Warnock, by the way, who's one of our pals in the media centre here, works alongside me. Absolutely. Works alongside me in the Age of Le Mans series, doing social media there, and for the Radio Le Mans too. But another of the Radio Le Mans colleagues who is here is pit lane reporter Shahia Adam, and she's actually handed me this question. And there's a question to you, Marshall Pruett. What proud American driver would you like to throw in a right-hand drive Virgin supercar machine with no practice, having never driven here before, do a full lap of Mount Panorama at full speed? She votes for Joey Hand because he's a pure Uncle Sam and could rock it.
Oh, that's a really, really good one. And we're sticking to Americans, those filthy, filthy Americans. Wow, where should I go here? I mean, this is... All right. I would actually say this one fairly easy then. I'm going to go with Ricky Taylor. I think as we continue to go on here in the good old IMSA series in North America, I think the Ballad of Ricky Taylor and how dang phenomenally good that kid is in any sports car. I think that will be sung more and more. And that's no disrespect to any other great Americans or any others competing here. But yeah, if you look at what he does at Acura Team Penske, knowing the all-time monsters and greats that he's surrounded by, for the most part, that kid's the gold standard among Castronevis's, Montoyas, and so on. So yeah, if we're talking an American, Joey's a great pick, by the way, Shay, and his driving style might actually be the best to throw in for that one lap, because he is so able to get up to the limit immediately, but be in a comfy zone and deal with oversteer and understeer and just adapt. He's phenomenal there. But I'd say that Ricky Taylor kid, he is made from some extraordinary stuff that, again, I hope as more years continue, folks will realize he's not just Wayne's kid. He's not just Jordan's brother. This is someone who should be commanding full respect as one of North America's greatest sports car drivers. So give him time, and I think we're going to loft those kinds of accolades his way. So that'd be my pick.
Well, my pick would be Scott Tucker. I think I'd like Scott to do repeated laps, but on the sole and only proviso, he has to be followed very closely indeed on each of those laps by Shane Van Gisbergen. Really, really close. Really, really, really close. So that's what I'd like to see, and I'd like in-car of all of that, please.
See,
I think you should do that.
You wear my level 5 shirt for 90 seconds, and there's an infestation. And I would say, we'd be remiss, we've gotten to the end of an episode, we haven't mentioned Christophe Bouchou. I mean, what are we doing? We're falling apart.
You just have. Maybe it should be Christophe Bouchou behind him. That would be even more terrifying.
Yes, and a surprising underground American. Most folks think he's French. Nope. He's from Des Moines, Iowa. That's right, boys and girls. All right. We always wait to stop the show until we've fallen off the rails. Have we succeeded in our devolvement, my friend, Mr. Goodwin?
Mate, we've stacked it like a derailed freight train.
Like North American. I won't say necessarily an American, but like a North American, we expect to stack his car massively this weekend at Bathurst. I think it is time to say farewell. Why don't you take us home and pay homage and tribute to our awesome partners and also our dear listeners?
Well, absolutely. Thank you again to Cooper Tires and to the fantastic Justice Brothers for their continuing backing for the Weekend Sports Cars. It's great to get into a second year MP. What a joyful thing that is to be able to say, not just with the work at the Weekend Sports Cars, but with new product coming along. There'll be more of that in time for weekend and beyond. And thank you absolutely to our listeners and for their continued support, not just in listening, not just in downloading, but in particular for engaging with us with those questions. It was a delight to see so many of you at Daytona. I look forward to seeing more of you here at Bathurst, and then again more still at Sebring.
And thanks to you as well, mate, for persevering through the vague, occasionally functioning magic of editing. We've tried to cut out a lot of connection issues we've had with you jumping from various Wi-Fi sources in the media center, but thank you for persevering. We've actually had to record this in 3 different segments, but alas, we've gotten to the finish line, my friends. So for Graham Goodwin, Daily Sports Car, please check out dailysportscar.com's coverage all weekend long of the Bathurst 12 Hour. And for myself, Marshall Pruett, thank you for listening. We will be back to you next week with not only another episode of the Week in Sports Cars, but I can't wait to see what our man Goodwin collects in terms of interviews for Inside the Sports Car Paddock. With all that said, we'll speak to you next week.